The palace had survived scandals, betrayals, secret recordings, explosive interviews, and public humiliation before, but nobody inside Buckingham Palace was prepared for the moment Princess Anne allegedly walked into a private royal meeting, placed a confidential security file on the table, and left King Charles completely speechless after recommending that Meghan's remaining royal privileges be quietly frozen behind closed doors. And according to insiders, the silence that followed inside that room terrified everyone more than the argument itself, because Charles reportedly did not defend Meghan immediately. He just stared at the documents while senior aides watched the atmosphere turn ice cold in seconds. For weeks, rumors had already been swirling through palace corridors that tensions between senior royals and the Sussex camp had reached a dangerous new level. Staff members allegedly whispered that private frustrations were no longer being hidden politely behind royal smiles and carefully scripted statements. Something had changed. Something heavier, more final. And insiders claimed Princess Anne had quietly become the center of that shift, not because she wanted public drama, not because she enjoyed confrontation, but because she reportedly believed the monarchy itself was slowly losing control of its own structure while emotional exceptions kept replacing discipline. According to palace sources, Anne had grown increasingly frustrated after repeated internal discussions about Meghan and Harry allegedly ended with hesitation, delays, and confusion over boundaries. The issue was no longer about public interviews alone. It was about access, influence, connections, internal trust. Staff members reportedly feared there were too many blurred lines between non-working royals and official palace operations. And Anne allegedly reached her limit after learning that certain privileges connected to Meghan's former royal status had quietly remained active despite growing internal resistance from security teams and senior household officials. That was reportedly when the emergency private meeting happened. Sources claimed Anne arrived carrying a folder described by insiders as deeply uncomfortable reading. Security reviews, internal recommendations, access discussions, concerns raised privately over protocol inconsistencies. Nobody expected Anne to confront the situation so directly in front of the king himself. But according to whispers spreading through palace offices afterward, she allegedly looked Charles straight in the eyes and calmly argued that continuing flexible treatment toward Meghan was creating instability inside the institution. No shouting, no emotional explosion, which somehow made it even more chilling. And then came the moment that stunned the room. According to insiders, Anne reportedly suggested freezing several remaining unofficial royal privileges connected to Meghan's access, ceremonial treatment, and internal accommodation flexibility until future trust conditions were reassessed privately. The wording alone allegedly sent panic through several aides inside the room because it sounded less like temporary frustration and more like the beginning of permanent institutional distancing. King Charles reportedly froze completely. Sources claimed he initially believed Anne was exaggerating, but the deeper the discussion went, the quieter the room became. Because Anne allegedly wasn't speaking emotionally, she was speaking strategically. She reportedly warned that public controversies, internal distrust, and repeated media tensions were slowly damaging the monarchy's authority from inside. And according to insiders, several senior officials sitting nearby quietly agreed with her concerns even while avoiding direct eye contact with Charles himself. That detail reportedly shook the king more than anything else, because suddenly this was no longer one family disagreement. It was becoming institutional. Palace staff later described the atmosphere afterward as emotionally radioactive. Doors reportedly closed early. Meetings were shortened. Communications teams quietly entered crisis preparation mode, fearing leaks could explode publicly if details escaped palace walls. One aide allegedly described the palace that night as a building full of people pretending nothing happened, while everybody knew everything had changed. Meanwhile, whispers about Prince William's alleged reaction only intensified the tension further. According to insiders, William was informed shortly after the meeting ended, and instead of resisting Anne's position, sources claimed he privately understood it immediately, not necessarily because he wanted harsh punishment, but because he allegedly shared growing fears that the monarchy's future depended on restoring stricter boundaries before public trust weakened even further. That realization reportedly devastated some palace aides who had hoped William might soften the situation privately. Instead, insiders claimed his silence was interpreted internally as quiet support for Anne's growing influence. And once that perception spread, panic started moving through royal offices fast. Because if Anne and William were beginning to align behind closed doors on institutional discipline, then the monarchy itself might already be entering a completely different era. Less emotional, less forgiving, far more controlled. And according to insiders, Meghan allegedly sensed that shift immediately. Sources close close to palace operations claimed word of the meeting reached California faster than expected. At first, Meghan reportedly believed the rumors were exaggerated palace gossip designed to intimidate her indirectly. But when communication between certain royal offices suddenly became colder and noticeably more formal afterward, insiders claimed alarm bells started ringing privately between Sussex advisors. By the next morning, Buckingham Palace no longer felt like the same building. According to insiders, the atmosphere had turned unnaturally tense overnight, almost like everyone inside the institution understood that an invisible line had finally been crossed. Staff members reportedly stopped speaking openly in corridors. Private secretaries allegedly began scheduling conversations behind closed doors only. Even veteran palace aides who had survived decades of royal scandals were said to be quietly shaken by how fast the situation surrounding Meghan's alleged privilege freeze had escalated into something far more dangerous than a temporary family disagreement. Because now, according to insiders, this was no longer about personalities. This was about power. And Princess Anne allegedly knew exactly what she was doing. Sources claimed Anne spent the following hours privately reinforcing her position with senior household officials, insisting the monarchy could no longer afford emotional flexibility where institutional authority was concerned. To some aides, her calmness reportedly felt terrifying. There was no panic in her behavior, no regret, no hesitation. Insiders described her as colder than ever, almost as if she had spent years preparing mentally for this exact confrontation, while everyone else around her continued pretending the fractures inside the royal family could still be repaired peacefully. Meanwhile, King Charles reportedly remained trapped in emotional paralysis behind closed doors. According to palace whispers, he desperately wanted to avoid another public disaster involving Harry and Meghan because every previous fallout had damaged the monarchy's image internationally. But Anne allegedly kept pressing one chilling argument repeatedly during private discussions afterward. If boundaries inside the institution meant nothing anymore, then eventually the monarchy itself would mean nothing too. That statement reportedly haunted Charles, because insiders claimed he privately knew Anne was not entirely wrong. For years, tensions surrounding Harry and Meghan had reportedly created growing frustration among working royals carrying out official duties while simultaneously watching palace crises explode publicly over and over again. According to sources, Anne believed public sympathy had started overriding royal structure itself, and she allegedly warned Charles that continuing to blur the line between working and non-working royals would create long-term instability the monarchy might never recover from. And then another shocking detail allegedly emerged behind palace walls. Sources claimed security officials quietly began reviewing additional access arrangements connected to former Sussex privileges only hours after Anne's explosive meeting. Not publicly, not officially, quietly. Internal discussions reportedly focused on transportation coordination, residential accommodations during future UK visits, ceremonial positioning, and private access pathways traditionally reserved for trusted senior royals. The reviews themselves allegedly sent shockwaves through palace offices because aides immediately understood the symbolism behind them. This wasn't simply frustration anymore. It looked like restructuring, a slow institutional tightening happening silently while the public remained distracted by headlines and speculation outside palace gates. And according to insiders, Meghan reportedly became absolutely furious after hearing whispers that additional restrictions could be coming next. Sources close to the Sussex circle claimed Meghan interpreted Anne's alleged actions as deeply personal and deliberately humiliating. But what reportedly disturbed her most was not Anne alone. It was the silence surrounding Anne. No senior royal publicly softened the story. No visible defense emerged. No reassuring message quietly appeared through palace channels. And that silence allegedly felt louder with every passing hour. Prince Harry, meanwhile, was reportedly spiraling emotionally behind the scenes. According to insiders, he could not understand how relationships inside the family had deteriorated so badly that discussions about freezing Meghan's privileges were allegedly happening at the highest levels of the monarchy without anyone forcefully stopping it. Sources claimed Harry viewed the entire situation as proof that certain palace figures had quietly decided there was no path back for him and Meghan inside the institution. That realization reportedly devastated him, and palace aides feared what might happen next, because according to whispers inside communications offices, the monarchy's biggest nightmare was never public criticism itself. It was emotional retaliation. Another interview, another documentary, another wave of accusations exposing private royal tensions globally once again. Several staff members allegedly spent the night preparing contingency plans for potential media fallout if Harry or Meghan decided to respond indirectly through allies, journalists, or future projects. But even amid the panic, one thing reportedly became impossible to ignore inside Buckingham Palace. Princess Anne's influence had suddenly become enormous. Sources claimed senior royals who once viewed Anne simply as the monarchy's hardest-working loyalist were now beginning to see her as something else entirely. The person willing to enforce boundaries others were too emotionally conflicted to impose themselves. And according to insiders, that growing respect behind closed doors only strengthened Anne further. Some aides even whispered that William privately admired Anne's ability to separate personal emotion from institutional survival in ways Charles still struggled to do. As the week continued, insiders claimed the emotional divide inside the royal family deepened dramatically. Communication allegedly became colder, more formal, more distant. Palace staff reportedly sensed reconciliation efforts quietly collapsing behind the scenes, while institutional protection became the monarchy's new priority above everything else. And somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, according to one chilling insider account, King Charles allegedly stared silently at the growing crisis around him, realizing something devastating. This may have been the moment the monarchy stopped trying to bring Harry and Meghan back and started preparing emotionally for a future without them entirely.